Awareness is the greatest agent for change. You can't sell it convincing. You don't notice the moment your attention leaves yourself. You only notice the discomfort that follows. Not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle tightening in the chest, a faint restlessness, like something went missing, but you can't name what. Most people assume that feeling is life. They wake up already slightly behind something, already chasing the next moment, already leaning toward what needs to happen instead of resting inside what is. And it feels normal. So normal that no one questions it, not because they are incapable, but because the question itself never forms. You know the feeling I'm talking about, the quiet sense that you're always a few inches away from yourself, present enough to function, absent enough to feel tired for no clear reason, not depressed, not broken, just dulled, like you're watching your own life through a layer of glass. At first you thought this was maturity, then responsibility, then adulthood, then maybe just how things are. You learn to call it discipline, you learn to call it realism, you learn to call it being grounded, but there was always something else underneath, something softer, something truer, something that didn't disappear even when everything else got louder, a version of you that only shows up in rare moments, sometimes late at night, sometimes when you're driving with no destination, sometimes when someone looks at you without expectation, sometimes when you forget to perform for a moment. Those moments don't feel exciting. They feel familiar, like returning to a room you forgot you built. And maybe that's why they unsettle you, because they feel more like home than the life you've constructed. There's a level of awareness people rarely reach, not because it's advanced, but because it's inconvenient. It doesn't reward productivity. It doesn't strengthen identity. It doesn't reinforce the story you've been maintaining. It dissolves things. Quietly, without ceremony. You don't climb into it, you fall into it when something inside you stops trying. You've been there before. You just didn't label it. It happens when you're no longer trying to impress the moment, when you're no longer positioning yourself inside it, when you're no longer measuring how you appear inside your own head. There's a simplicity that arrives, not relief, not happiness, just clarity. Like the difference between holding your breath and finally exhaling, without realizing you were tense. Around this point, something else becomes noticeable. The way your reactions soften, the way your thoughts lose urgency, the way you stop needing to defend your internal position on everything. You're still aware, more aware actually, but less occupied. This is hard to explain without sounding like philosophy, so let's stay grounded. Think about the last time you were deeply listening to someone, not waiting to speak, not shaping your response, not managing your image. Just listening. There was a stillness there, a neutrality, a strange openness. You didn't feel small, you didn't feel powerful, you just felt present. That's closer to the level most people never reach than anything they try to achieve, and what's strange is that you don't get there by effort. You don't get there by improvement. You don't get there by optimization. You get there when the inner tension drops long enough for something more natural to surface. Most people spend their lives sharpening their personality, polishing it, protecting it, explaining it, curating it. Very few ever notice the exhaustion that comes from carrying it, not because personality is bad, but because they mistake it for themselves. And so they defend it, they decorate it, they refine it, they make decisions to preserve it, without realizing that something much quieter has been watching the whole time. You don't need to accept that right now. Just notice the idea gently passing through, because there's more beneath that, and we'll return to it in a different way a little later. Here's something most people experience but almost never articulate. There are moments when you're alone, not physically but internally. Moments when you're not trying to manage perception. Moments when you're not tracking how you're doing. Moments when you're not evaluating yourself. And in those moments, you don't disappear. You become clearer. Your senses sharpen. Your body feels simpler. Your thoughts feel like background weather instead of commands. You still function, you still exist, but you're no longer forcing your existence into a shape. This is why certain places feel different, why certain people feel different, why certain environments feel easier to breathe in. Not because they're better, but because they ask less of your performance. You're not trying to be someone in those spaces. You're just there. And that's when awareness changes quality. It stops being something you use. It becomes something you are. You've probably noticed that life feels heavier when you're constantly monitoring yourself, monitoring your tone, monitoring your choices, monitoring how you come across, monitoring your progress, monitoring your direction. It's exhausting, but so common that it feels like maturity. Most people assume that self-awareness means constant self-observation, but the deeper awareness isn't busy. It isn't analytical. It isn't corrective. It's spacious. It doesn't ask, am I doing this right? It doesn't ask, how am I being perceived? It doesn't ask, what should I become? It simply notices, and that noticing changes things without trying to change them. You don't suddenly become passive. You don't become detached from life. You don't float away from reality. You become more here than you were before. The body feels more real. Sounds feel more textured. Moments feel more layered. You're not escaping experience. You're entering it more fully, but you're no longer pushing against it. This is where most people turn away. Not because it's frightening, but because it's unfamiliar. It doesn't offer identity reinforcement. It doesn't give you a role. It doesn't reward your usual strategies. It just offers presence. And presence feels empty if you're addicted to internal noise. Most people don't avoid this level of awareness consciously. They avoid it because it doesn't validate the effort they've been putting in. It doesn't praise you. It doesn't criticize you. It doesn't react to you at all. It simply exists beneath you, quietly available. You don't reach it by becoming someone else. You reach it by noticing how much of yourself has been held together by tension. There's a moment when that tension softens. It might last only a few seconds at first, a moment when you're no longer bracing for the next thought, no longer leaning toward the next problem, no longer subtly trying to control the flow of the moment. And in that moment, there's no revelation, no fireworks, no epiphany, just ease. And for some reason, that ease feels unfamiliar enough to be ignored. So you tense again, return to thinking, return to planning, return to narrating your own existence, because that feels safer than silence. But silence isn't emptiness. It's presence without commentary. You experience this more often than you realize. You just don't stay there. Like when you're watching something without thinking about yourself watching it. Like when you're walking and forget for a second that you're walking. Like when you're absorbed in something and the inner narration stops. Those moments aren't absence. They're alignment. You're not split between observer and performer. You're just here, that's the level. Not enlightenment, not transcendence, not escape, just undivided presence. And once you recognize it, you start noticing how rarely people live there. You start noticing how conversations are mostly performance, how reactions are mostly habitual, how identity is mostly repetition, not in a judgmental way, just in a clear way. You see people speaking not because they want to express, but because silence feels unsafe. You see people reacting not because they feel deeply, but because their pattern demands response. You see people chasing meaning, not because meaning is absent, but because they're disconnected from the one that already exists. You see it gently, without superiority, without distance, because you recognize it in yourself too. And there's a strange compassion that forms when you stop trying to fix this. When you stop thinking, oh, people should wake up. When you stop thinking, I need to stay in this state. When you stop turning awareness into another goal, that's when it deepens. Here's a subtle truth most people never consider. You're not trying to become aware. You're trying to stop interfering with awareness that's already here. That's why effort doesn't work. That's why techniques don't hold. That's why methods feel heavy after a while, because they assume awareness is something you build. But the deeper you go, the more you realize it's what remains when you stop constructing. You don't feel powerful there. You don't feel important there. You don't feel superior there. You feel ordinary and deeply real. Your thoughts still occur. Your emotions still move. Your preferences still exist, but they no longer define the center of you. They pass through instead of pulling you around. It's like the difference between being caught in weather and watching weather pass across the sky. The sky isn't trying to control the clouds. It isn't resisting them. It isn't following them. It just holds them. And when you recognize that space inside yourself, something shifts permanently, even if subtly. You stop trying to win your own internal arguments. You stop forcing clarity. You stop gripping experience. You become less dramatic internally, not because you suppress anything, but because you're no longer lost inside every sensation. And life doesn't become easier. It becomes more honest. You feel things fully. You just don't drown inside them. You still care. You just don't cling. You still desire. You just don't attach your identity to fulfillment. That's the level most people never reach. Not because it's rare, but because it requires releasing the addiction to self-maintenance. You've probably felt the edges of this already, like when something you feared happened, and after the initial wave passed, there was a strange calm. Like when something ended, and after the grief softened, there was unexpected spaciousness. Like when something you chased finally arrived, and the satisfaction felt quieter than expected. Those moments carry a strange clarity. They don't tell you what to do. They just show you that beneath everything you manage, something else remains untouched. Most people rush past that realization. They distract themselves again. They rebuild the narrative. They return to identity. Because sitting in that openness feels like standing without armor. But that openness isn't vulnerability. It's stability. It's the difference between controlling life and being present with it. Around here, it becomes harder to explain, not because it's complex, but because language starts to distort it. So instead of explaining, let's stay with experience, you've noticed that some people feel different to be around. Not more positive, not more successful, not more confident, just grounded. They don't perform presence. They don't project certainty. They don't try to guide the room. They simply occupy themselves without tension. And around them, you feel less tense too. Not because they're doing something, but because they're not. They're not managing perception. They're not subtly negotiating every moment. They're not feeding off reaction. They're just here. And you can feel the difference immediately. That's not charisma. That's not wisdom. That's not mastery. That's absence of internal friction. That's awareness unburdened. Most people assume the highest state is becoming more insightful, more healed, more disciplined, more evolved. But the deeper reality is simpler. The highest state is becoming less divided, less fragmented, less internally conflicted, less preoccupied, not empty, integrated. You're not trying to control your experience. You're not trying to escape it. You're not trying to improve it. You're participating in it fully without resistance. And the strange thing is that when this happens, life doesn't become dull. It becomes vivid. Colors feel sharper. Sounds feel closer. Moments feel slower in a good way. Not because reality changed, but because you stopped filtering it through constant interpretation. You're no longer asking, what does this mean about me? You're no longer asking, how should I respond to this? You're no longer asking, is this good or bad for my story? You're just here. And that changes everything without needing to change anything. There's a quiet recognition that arrives around this point. Not intellectual, not emotional, just clear. The realization that you've been living as a version of yourself most of the time. And occasionally, you drop into something truer. Not higher, not superior, just less constructed. You notice that when you're in that space, decisions arise more naturally. You don't overthink. You don't hesitate as much. You don't need external confirmation. Not because you're confident, but because you're not arguing with yourself. You feel aligned without trying to be. You're not forcing direction. You're responding to what's actually here. This isn't something you hold on to. The moment you try, it tightens. It's something you allow. And the paradox is that you can't allow it by trying to allow it. You notice it when you stop interfering long enough. That's why it tends to happen unexpectedly. In between thoughts, in moments of exhaustion, in moments of surrender, in moments of stillness. You've touched it before, you just didn't know what you were touching. And there's a reason this level of awareness is rarely reached consistently. It offers no identity. You can't build a personality around it. You can't showcase it, glide. You can't perform it. It removes the need to be seen as anything, which is why most people unconsciously avoid it. Because the ego doesn't die there. It simply stops being central. It becomes a tool instead of the seat of experience. You still function. You still engage. You still live fully. But you're no longer trying to exist as a character. You're just here, responding to life directly. And this might sound abstract, but you already know what this feels like. You've had moments where you spoke without rehearsing, moments where you acted without overthinking, moments where you felt connected without explanation. Those moments weren't accidents, they were glimpses, and there's something deeper here that deserves attention, but not yet. We'll approach it from another angle soon. Let's slow down for a moment. Notice how your mind feels right now. Not the content, the texture. Is it tense? Is it searching? Is it waiting for something to land? Just notice. That noticing alone is closer to awareness than most of your thinking ever gets. You're not trying to change it. You're not trying to fix it. You're just observing the experience of being here. This isn't technique, this isn't practice. This is just reality happening. And the strange thing is, when you stop trying to do anything with awareness, it naturally deepens. Not dramatically, not spiritually, just naturally. You begin to sense the difference between thoughts happening and you being the one aware of them. Not as a concept, as an experience. Thoughts come, sensations move, emotions shift, but there's a background presence that doesn't fluctuate with them. It's not elevated, it's not special, it's simply consistent. You don't feel like you disappear when you're sad. You don't feel like you appear when you're happy. You're there through all of it. And at some point you realize you've been identifying with the waves instead of the ocean. Not because someone taught you to, but because no one ever suggested otherwise. This isn't awakening, it's remembering. You're not discovering something new. You're noticing something that was always present beneath your attention. That's why it feels familiar instead of foreign. You don't go, wow, this is new. You go, oh, this. And there's a quiet sadness that can arise here too. Not despair, not grief, just a recognition of how much effort you've spent trying to become someone when something simpler was available all along. You might recognize how many decisions were made out of fear of perception, how many actions were shaped by identity, how many moments were filtered instead of lived. But even that recognition doesn't feel heavy in this state. It feels neutral, like observing a pattern without judgment, because awareness isn't cruel. It doesn't condemn. It doesn't reward. It just sees. And when you see clearly, patterns soften naturally, not because you force them to change, but because they lose their unconscious grip. You don't have to stop your habits. You don't have to fight your tendencies. You don't have to correct your behavior. You simply become more present to them. And presence changes relationship. You don't suppress thought. You see thought. You don't suppress emotion. You feel emotion. You don't suppress reaction. You notice reaction. And noticing dissolves identification. You're no longer inside the storm, you're aware of the storm. It doesn't make you passive, it makes you responsive. You still act, you just don't react blindly. This is the level most people never reach. Not because it's hidden, but because it's too subtle for a culture addicted to stimulation. It doesn't scream, it doesn't dazzle, it doesn't perform, it simply exists. And when you begin to sense it more clearly, something else shifts. You stop needing life to validate you. You still enjoy success, you still feel pain, you still care deeply, but your sense of being doesn't rise and fall with circumstances. You're not trying to protect yourself constantly. You're not negotiating your worth moment by moment. You exist first. Everything else happens second. And that changes how you move through the world. You're less defensive, less performative, less attached to outcome. Not because you're detached from life, but because you're rooted in something deeper than outcomes. This doesn't make you indifferent, it makes you stable, and that stability feels foreign at first, almost suspicious, because you're so used to equating intensity with meaning. You're used to believing that if something doesn't feel dramatic, it must not be significant. But this level of awareness is deeply undramatic. It doesn't feel like transformation. It feels like returning to a state you vaguely remember from childhood, before identity solidified, before self-consciousness dominated, before internal commentary became constant. Not innocence, clarity. You still understand complexity. You still navigate responsibility. You still experience depth. But without the internal pressure, you don't feel like you're holding yourself together all the time. You just are. And there's a point where this begins to affect how you perceive others. You stop seeing people primarily as their behaviors. You start sensing the tension behind their behaviors. You see the insecurity behind defensiveness. You see the longing behind arrogance. You see the fear behind control, not intellectually, viscerally. And it doesn't make you superior, it makes you softer. You stop needing people to be different. You stop needing to fix them. You stop needing to wake them up. You understand that awareness can't be forced. It only unfolds when the inner grip loosens. And you recognize how rarely that happens intentionally. Most people don't resist awareness. They simply never pause long enough to notice it. They fill every space with sound, every silence with stimulation, every moment with narrative. Not because they're shallow, but because stillness feels unsafe when you've spent your life inside mental noise. The first time someone touches this deeper awareness, it can feel unsettling, not frightening, just unfamiliar. You realize how noisy your internal world has been, how tense, how cluttered, and when that noise quiets even slightly, you feel exposed, like stepping into a wide open field after years in a crowded room. It's not comfortable at first, not because it's bad, but because you're not used to that much internal space. But if you stay with it, gently, without trying to understand it, without trying to own it, something stabilizes. The openness stops feeling empty. It starts feeling natural, like breathing deeper after years of shallow breaths. You don't feel high, you feel normal in a way you forgot was possible, and this changes the quality of your life more than any external achievement ever could. Not because life becomes perfect, but because your relationship to imperfection shifts. You still experience uncertainty, you just don't collapse into it. You still experience loss, you just don't lose yourself with it. You still experience joy, you just don't cling to it. There's a quiet continuity beneath everything, and the more you recognize that continuity, the less you feel fragmented. You're no longer multiple selves trying to coordinate. You're just one presence moving through different moments. This isn't a destination. It's not something you arrive at and stay in forever. It fluctuates, it deepens, it recedes, it returns. Not because you're failing, but because you're human. The difference is that once you recognize it, you know it's there. You're no longer searching for something vague and undefined. You're no longer chasing fulfillment externally. You know there's a level of experience available that doesn't depend on circumstances, and that knowing subtly changes everything. You stop trying to become someone else. You start noticing who you are beneath becoming. You stop trying to control your journey. You start trusting the unfolding, not blindly, not passively, but naturally. Because awareness doesn't require belief, it reveals itself through experience. And the more you rest in it, the more life begins to feel like a dialogue rather than a battle. Not because life stops challenging you, but because you're no longer meeting every challenge with inner resistance. You respond instead of react. You participate instead of struggle. You engage instead of endure. This is the level most people never reach. Not because it's distant, but because it requires releasing the idea that you need to reach anything at all. And if this feels familiar in a way that's hard to articulate, that's not an accident. It's recognition, not learning, remembering. And there's still more beneath this, not deeper in complexity, deeper in simplicity. We'll approach that gently. For now, just notice the feeling that arises when you imagine living without constant internal effort, without constant self-management, without constant identity maintenance, not floating away, not disengaged, just fully here without tension. If that feels less like fantasy and more like memory, you're closer to this level than you might think, and we'll continue unfolding this from another direction. You begin to notice something else when awareness deepens, not as an idea, as a pattern. You realize how much of your suffering was never caused by what happened. It came from the effort to resist what was happening. Not dramatic suffering, not trauma, just everyday friction. The subtle tension of wanting moments to feel different. The quiet disappointment when reality doesn't match expectation. The background anxiety of managing direction. You notice how often the mind is negotiating with life. This shouldn't be happening. This should already be different. I need this to mean something. I need to figure this out. And the more closely you look, the more you realize how exhausting that negotiation has been. Not because life is harsh, but because resistance is constant. You weren't tired because you were doing too much. You were tired because you were subtly fighting experience, fighting boredom, fighting discomfort, fighting uncertainty, fighting silence, fighting not knowing. And when that fighting pauses, even briefly, something unexpected happens. Energy returns, not motivation, not excitement. Energy. You don't feel driven. You feel available. You don't feel like you need to escape the moment. You feel capable of staying. Most people believe they're exhausted from effort. They rarely consider they're exhausted from inner opposition, from constantly leaning away from what is. There's a difference between living and tolerating life. Most people are tolerating their job, tolerating their relationships, tolerating their thoughts, tolerating themselves. They don't hate their lives, they just feel slightly disconnected from them. And because the disconnection is subtle, it becomes normal. You begin to notice how often people are elsewhere even while speaking, how often you were elsewhere even while listening. The body here, the mind ahead, the attention divided. That fragmentation feels normal until you taste something else, until you experience what it feels like to be undivided, not hyper-focused, not intense, just whole. It's not dramatic. That's the strange part. It doesn't feel like an altered state. It feels like the absence of strain, like unclenching muscles you forgot you were holding. And when you live from that space more often, you start to notice something quietly profound. Life responds differently, not magically, not dramatically, not in ways you can show, but in subtle alignment. You meet the right conversation without trying. You say things you didn't rehearse but that feel accurate. You notice opportunities without chasing them. You step away from situations without forcing yourself to, not because you became strategic, but because you stopped distorting perception with tension. You're not trying to control the path. You're noticing where your energy naturally moves. That's the shift most people never experience. They assume direction comes from effort. They assume clarity comes from thinking. They assume movement comes from pressure. But real movement feels different. It doesn't feel like pushing. It feels like recognition. You're not convincing yourself. You're not motivating yourself. You're not forcing yourself. You're responding. There's a difference between choosing and aligning. Most people are choosing constantly. Very few are listening. Listening not to intuition as an abstract idea. Listening to the subtle ease inside certain directions. The quiet heaviness inside others. You've felt this before. The moment when something looks perfect on paper but feels off. The moment when something doesn't make sense logically but feels right. The moment when you say yes and your body relaxes. The moment when you say no and your chest softens. That isn't strategy. That's coherence. You don't have to believe in anything for that to be real. You've experienced it. The problem is that most people override it. They tell themselves they're being irrational. They tell themselves they're being lazy. They tell themselves they should be more disciplined. So they abandon that subtle intelligence and return to control. And control feels safer. It gives the illusion of stability, the illusion of direction, the illusion of security. But awareness without tension feels safer in a deeper way. Not because outcomes are guaranteed, but because you're no longer at war with the unfolding. You begin to trust something that doesn't have a name, not fate, not destiny, not spirituality. Just the simple observation that when you stop forcing, things tend to flow more naturally. Not always comfortably, but more honestly. And honesty feels stabilizing. There's a moment in this process where you start noticing how identity itself is constructed. Not intellectually, experientially. You notice that certain versions of you appear in certain environments. You speak differently around different people. You hold your body differently. You filter differently. You're not being fake. You're adapting, but you begin to see how much effort goes into maintaining those adaptations, how much energy goes into staying consistent with the image you believe you are, and you begin to see that beneath all those variations, something else remains unchanged. Not personality, not behavior, presence. The same awareness looking through different moments. You don't lose your personality when this becomes clearer. You don't become blank. You don't become neutral. You become less rigid. You stop clinging to being a certain way. You stop defending your traits. You stop narrating yourself constantly. You allow yourself to shift naturally. And that's when something else starts happening. You feel less threatened by change, not because you've mastered uncertainty, but because your sense of self is no longer tied to fixed identity. You don't feel like you disappear when roles shift. You don't feel like you lose yourself when circumstances change. You're still here. That stability isn't emotional. It's existential. And it's subtle enough that most people never notice it. They're too busy trying to become someone. You begin to realize how much of life is driven by the desire to become successful, become respected, become secure, become understood, become valued. Those desires aren't wrong, but they're exhausting when they become the center of identity. You're no longer living. You're shaping yourself for future validation. And awareness gently reveals that. Not in a harsh way, not in a critical way, just in a way that feels like honesty. You see how often you've postponed presence in exchange for potential. I'll relax when things settle. I'll enjoy this when I get there. I'll feel okay once this is resolved. And awareness shows you something quietly uncomfortable. There is no later moment where you arrive. There is only this unfolding, not philosophically, practically. You reach goals and the inner state barely changes. You resolve issues and new ones arise. You accomplish milestones and the satisfaction fades faster than expected. Not because life is disappointing, but because you've been orienting your well-being toward outcomes instead of alignment. Alignment doesn't feel like pleasure. It feels like coherence. Like your inner state isn't arguing with your outer life. Like you're not pretending, not forcing, not performing, just participating. And when you experience that, even occasionally something changes in your priorities. You stop asking, how do I get what I want? You start asking, what feels real right now? Not as a method, as a natural shift. You stop needing everything to be optimized. You start valuing what feels honest. You begin to see that a quiet life lived in coherence feels richer than a loud life lived in performance. That's not something you're taught. It's something you discover when awareness deepens. There's another shift that often happens around here. You begin to recognize that forgetting is not failure. Forgetting who you are. Forgetting your clarity. Forgetting your presence. Forgetting this awareness. You stop judging yourself for it because you see that the forgetting is part of the experience. You fall back into old patterns. You get caught in thought. You react unconsciously. You lose presence. And instead of self-criticism, there's recognition. Oh, this too. You begin to see that awareness isn't something you must hold perfectly. It's something you return to gently, again and again. Not because you failed, but because returning is the movement itself. Most people believe that growth should look linear, consistent, permanent. But awareness doesn't work like that. It expands, it contracts, it deepens, it disappears, it returns. Not because you're doing it wrong, but because experience itself is cyclical. The difference is that once you recognize awareness, you stop fearing the loss of it. You know it's not gone, you know it's simply obscured temporarily by attention. And that changes your relationship with struggle. You don't see difficult periods as regression. You see them as density. Moments where life becomes more intense, more layered, more confronting. And instead of trying to escape those moments, you become curious about them. Not intellectually curious, experientially curious. What is actually happening here? What am I feeling beneath the narrative? What part of me is reacting right now? Not as questions you force, as awareness that naturally begins to inquire. And this inquiry isn't mental, it's observational. You're not trying to solve yourself, you're noticing yourself. And noticing changes the relationship. You stop being inside every reaction. You start witnessing reactions arise, not with distance, with intimacy. You feel the emotion fully, but you're not collapsed into it. You experience thought fully, but you're not owned by it. You're present inside experience without being consumed by it. This doesn't make you detached. It makes you integrated. There's a subtle maturity that emerges here. Not social maturity, not intellectual maturity, existential maturity. You stop expecting life to behave a certain way. You stop demanding meaning from every event. You stop needing narrative closure. You allow moments to be incomplete. You allow questions to remain unanswered. You allow experiences to be what they are, not because you gave up, but because you stopped forcing resolution. And something unexpected happens when you stop forcing meaning. Meaning becomes more natural. You begin to feel that life isn't something happening to you. It's something unfolding with you, not because you control it, but because you're not separate from it. Your reactions shape the experience. Your attention shapes perception. Your resistance shapes suffering. You see this directly. When you tense against a moment, it feels heavier. When you allow a moment, it flows differently. Not because the event changed, but because your relationship to it changed. And this brings you to a strange realization. You've been trying to control reality when what actually shapes experience is perception, not belief, not affirmation, not technique. Perception, how you interpret, how you resist, how you engage, how you allow. You don't need to change reality. You experience reality through perception, and perception isn't fixed, it shifts with awareness. You've experienced this too. The same situation feels different depending on your state. The same words feel different depending on your openness. The same memory feels different depending on your present awareness. Reality isn't static. Experience isn't static. And when you begin to see that, you stop trying to dominate experience. You start paying attention to how you're meeting it. That's a subtle but radical shift. You're no longer asking, how do I control outcomes? You're noticing, how am I relating to what's happening? That's where real change occurs. Not because you manipulate perception, but because you stop distorting it unconsciously. You allow clarity, and clarity reveals patterns. You see how certain thoughts repeat, how certain emotional loops form, how certain reactions arise predictably, not as a problem, as information. And when you see a pattern clearly enough, without judgment, without urgency, without agenda, something happens. The pattern loosens, not because you fought it, but because it was seen. Unconscious patterns persist in darkness. They dissolve in awareness, not instantly, not magically, gently. You begin to experience life less like a series of reactions and more like a dialogue. Life presents. You respond. Life responds. You adjust, not from strategy, from presence. You stop living inside scripts. You start living inside immediacy. You're not thinking, what does this mean about me? You're experiencing what is actually happening. That's the level. Not elevated, not mystical, just undivided. And here, something else becomes clear. You stop needing everything to be understood, not because you stop caring, but because you stop equating understanding with safety. You allow ambiguity, you allow complexity, you allow paradox. You don't need life to resolve into neat explanations. You're okay being inside questions, not anxious, not seeking closure, just open. This openness is deeply uncomfortable for the ego, because the ego thrives on certainty. Identity thrives on definition, but awareness thrives in openness. It doesn't need certainty, it doesn't need labels, it doesn't need narrative, it simply observes. And when you live more from awareness than identity, you begin to sense something else quietly emerging. You feel less separate from others, not emotionally dependent, not overly connected, just less divided. You recognize yourself in others more easily. You see your own patterns mirrored in people around you. You feel a quiet familiarity with strangers, not because you idealize humanity, but because you recognize shared experience. Fear, longing, confusion, hope, avoidance, connection. You stop seeing people as characters. You start seeing them as consciousness navigating form, not intellectually, experientially, and this naturally softens judgment. You still see harmful behavior. You still maintain boundaries. You still discern, but you're no longer fueled by internal hostility. You see behavior without collapsing into reaction. You feel pain without needing to blame. You recognize complexity without oversimplifying. This isn't moral superiority, it's perceptual clarity. You're no longer filtering everyone through your identity. You're seeing them more directly. And when this happens, relationships change. Not because you try to change them, but because your presence changes the dynamic. You listen more deeply. You respond more honestly. You stop performing for approval. You stop managing impressions. Not because you're trying to be authentic, but because performance no longer feels natural. You can't unsee awareness once you've tasted it. You can ignore it. You can override it. You can forget it temporarily, but it's there, waiting quietly beneath the noise. You begin to understand why most people never reach this level, not because it's hidden, but because it requires letting go of the idea that you need to become something. It requires releasing the narrative of progress, not giving up growth, letting go of identity-based striving, the part of you that wants to become enlightened, the part of you that wants to master awareness, the part of you that wants to achieve clarity. That part has to soften too. Because awareness isn't a badge, it's not a status, it's not an accomplishment. It's what remains when the need to achieve dissolves. This is where many people turn away, because the ego wants reward, it wants recognition, it wants accomplishment. Awareness offers none of that. It offers presence, and presence feels too simple for a mind trained to seek complexity. But simplicity isn't shallowness, it's depth without noise. You don't need to understand this, you need to recognize it. You already have. You've had moments of pure presence before, moments without effort, moments without narrative. You just didn't value them because they didn't feel impressive. But those moments were the most real you've ever felt. And there's something else here, something even quieter, that tends to reveal itself only when awareness becomes familiar rather than novel. It's not an idea. It's not an experience. It's a subtle shift in identity itself. Not personality, not memory, not character. The sense of being, but we won't push into that yet. We'll let it emerge naturally when the ground is ready. For now, notice something simpler. Notice how often you're waiting for life to begin, waiting for clarity, waiting for permission, waiting for confidence, waiting for certainty. And notice how often life is already happening while you're waiting, not dramatically, in small moments, in breathing, in listening, in seeing, in feeling. Awareness isn't somewhere else. It's not a destination. It's this noticing, this presence, this moment unfolding without commentary. The more you rest in this, the more something begins to feel obvious. You were never disconnected. You were just distracted. You were never broken. You were just tense. You were never lost. You were just caught in narrative. And when narrative softens, what remains is simple. Being, not mystical, not philosophical. Just being here, aware of being here. That's the level. Not unreachable, not reserved for a few. Just overlooked, because it's too quiet for a world that celebrates noise. And this is where the conversation deepens even further, but not by adding complexity, by removing one more layer. We'll move toward that next. There's a point where something shifts, almost imperceptibly. Not in your thoughts, not in your emotions, but in where you feel like you're living from. Before, it felt like you were living from your story, from your past, from your expectations, from your identity. And slowly, without ceremony, that center of gravity moves. You're still the same person, you still have the same memories, the same habits, the same personality, but something is less attached. You're no longer living inside the narrative. You're aware of the narrative happening, and the difference between those two is subtle but absolute. When you're inside the narrative, everything feels personal. Every silence feels loaded. Every delay feels meaningful. Every reaction feels justified. Every emotion feels like truth. When you're aware of the narrative, everything becomes lighter, not less important, just less fused. You still feel hurt. You just don't become the hurt. You still feel uncertainty. You just don't lose yourself inside it. You still experience desire. You just don't collapse into longing. This isn't detachment. It's intimacy without entanglement. You're closer to experience than ever before, but you're no longer drowning inside it. And what's strange is that this shift doesn't announce itself. There's no moment where you think, now I've reached something. It doesn't feel like arriving. It feels like noticing you were never as confined as you thought. You start to see how much of your life has been lived from momentum. Habitual thoughts, habitual reactions, habitual self-image, habitual emotional patterns. Not because you chose them, but because you inherited them. From family, from culture, from environment, from survival. And awareness doesn't judge that. It simply reveals it. You begin to notice how often you've been repeating patterns without ever questioning the source. Why certain situations trigger you. Why certain dynamics feel familiar even when painful. Why certain fears return in different forms. Why certain desires feel endless. Not as a psychological analysis, as lived observation. You see the loops. And the moment you truly see a loop, without trying to break it, without trying to fix it, without condemning it, something subtle happens. It loses momentum, not because you conquered it, but because you're no longer unconsciously inside it. You're aware of it while it runs. That awareness changes your relationship to it. The pattern doesn't own you anymore. It's something moving through experience. And this is where life begins to feel less like repetition and more like unfolding. You're no longer replaying the same emotional script with different characters. You're no longer reenacting the same internal conflicts in new environments. You're responding more freshly, more directly, more presently, not because you're trying to evolve, but because awareness dissolves inertia. And this is where many people feel a strange emptiness, not depression, not sadness, but absence of drama. The inner conflicts that used to occupy so much mental space begin to quiet. The emotional intensity that once defined your inner world begins to soften. The identity that once felt rigid begins to feel more fluid, and for a while, that can feel disorienting. You might even miss the chaos, because chaos was familiar, because tension felt like identity. because struggle felt like depth. And when those things begin to loosen, there's a question that arises without words. If I'm not struggling, who am I? Not as fear, as curiosity. And the answer doesn't arrive as a concept. It arrives as experience. You are still here, breathing, perceiving, aware. Nothing essential has disappeared, only the noise. You begin to realize how much of what you thought was you was actually tension, resistance, narrative, self-protection. And what remains feels strangely ordinary. You still laugh, you still care, you still feel deeply, you still have preferences, but there's less contraction around everything. You're not gripping experience anymore. You're not trying to stabilize identity moment by moment. You're just participating. And this is where the idea of parallel versions of yourself becomes less like a concept and more like recognition. Not different timelines, not different realities, different states of being. You've lived many versions of yourself already. The anxious version, the guarded version, the hopeful version, the withdrawn version, the driven version, the tired version, the open version, the present version. Not separate people, different alignments. And when awareness becomes central, you begin to notice how different life feels depending on which version you're inhabiting. The world looks different when you're tense. It looks different when you're open. People feel different when you're guarded. They feel different when you're present. Opportunities appear different when you're forcing. They appear different when you're receptive. Reality doesn't change. Your relationship with it does. You're not shifting worlds, you're shifting perception. And perception shapes experience far more than most people realize. You begin to notice that life isn't responding to your effort. It's responding to your state. Not in a magical way, in a practical way. When you're tense, you interpret everything through threat. When you're relaxed, you interpret through openness. When you're disconnected, everything feels distant. When you're present, everything feels immediate. Same world, different experience. And this leads to one of the quietest but most profound recognitions. You're not here to fix yourself. You're here to experience yourself. Not to perfect, not to resolve, not to complete, to experience. Every state, every emotion, every confusion, every clarity, every forgetting, every remembering. Not as a task, as a movement. And when you stop seeing your inner process as a project, something softens deeply. You're no longer trying to arrive. You're no longer trying to stabilize. You're no longer trying to hold on to awareness. You're simply noticing what is present right now. Sometimes that's clarity. Sometimes that's tension. Sometimes that's openness. Sometimes that's contraction. And none of it feels like failure. It just feels like experience. You stop labeling yourself as awakened or asleep. You stop measuring your progress. You stop tracking your depth, because you realize that the one doing the tracking was just another layer of identity. And without that tracking, there's relief. You don't need to be anywhere other than where you are. Not philosophically, viscerally. You're allowed to be confused. You're allowed to be clear. You're allowed to be open. You're allowed to be closed. You're allowed to forget. You're allowed to remember. None of it threatens the underlying awareness. It's all happening within it. And once you feel that deeply enough, you begin to sense something else. You stop trying to escape life. Not because life is perfect, but because you're no longer separate from it. You're inside the movement instead of observing from a defensive distance. You feel part of the unfolding rather than a victim of it. Even when things are difficult, even when things are uncertain, even when things are painful, there's still a sense of participation rather than opposition. You're no longer fighting the moment. You're meeting it. And meeting life directly changes everything. You notice beauty in ordinary moments, not because you're trying to be grateful, but because your attention is no longer elsewhere. You notice the texture of sound, the weight of silence, the subtlety of presence, the way moments actually feel when you're fully inside them. Life stops feeling like something to manage. It starts feeling like something to inhabit. You're not performing your existence, you're living it. And this isn't a permanent state. You still get pulled back into thought. You still fall into old patterns. You still forget. But now, forgetting doesn't feel like failure. It feels like part of the rhythm. You notice when you're lost in narrative. You notice when you're gripping. You notice when you're resisting. And that noticing brings you back, naturally, not to some elevated state, to simple presence, again and again and again. This is what most people never reach. Not enlightenment, Not transcendence, not mastery, but intimacy with their own experience. They live their entire lives thinking they are their thoughts, their reactions, their identities, their stories, and they never discover the deeper stability that has been present underneath all of it, not because it was hidden, but because it was too quiet to notice, too subtle to chase, too simple to value. And maybe the most understated part of all of this is that once you recognize it, you stop needing to convince anyone else. You don't feel the urge to explain it. You don't feel the urge to label it. You don't feel the urge to teach it. You see that awareness unfolds when it unfolds, not because of persuasion, but because of readiness. You recognize it in certain people when you speak to them, not in their words, in their presence. A softness, a groundedness, a lack of performance, a quality of attention. And when you recognize it, there's no excitement, no validation, just quiet recognition, like seeing a familiar face in a crowd. And maybe that's the final layer of this. Not understanding, not realization, not clarity. Recognition. You recognize yourself beneath your roles. You recognize others beneath theirs. You recognize life beneath its noise, not conceptually, directly. And when you begin to live from that recognition more often than not, life doesn't become something you need to solve. It becomes something you're present for, moment by moment, breath by breath, experience by experience. No urgency, no conclusion, no destination, just awareness noticing itself through form. And even as these words end, nothing actually ends. Because this isn't a message to remember. It's a state you've already touched, a state you'll forget again, a state you'll return to again, a state that isn't somewhere else. It's here, in the noticing, in the listening, in the quiet space where experience happens before it's interpreted. Not something to hold, not something to reach, just something to recognize, again and again.